My name is Dorothy, and I am 62 years old. As a retired pediatric nurse practitioner, I dedicated my career to compassionate child care, watching over countless newborns, with the same tenderness I'd give my own. I raised my son Michael as a single mother after his father abandoned us when he was just 3 years old. I poured every ounce of my love, my professional knowledge, and my heart into raising him right. Through sleepless nights, when he had colic through his scraped knees and teenage heartbreaks, I was there. I eagerly anticipated my cherished role as a loving grandmother, imagining myself holding my grandchild with the same gentle hands that had cradled so many babies throughout my nursing career. Then my granddaughter Lily was born. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, immediately banned me from the hospital room. She denied me that first precious hold, excluded me from the naming ceremony that I had dreamed about for months. My mother gets to hold Lily first. Dorothy is just the other grandmother, she declared with such coldness it took my breath away. My son Michael, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for, defended her cruel words. "You're being selfish, Mom. You're losing your mind." My grandson Ethan screamed at me, his young face twisted with coached hatred. My love, my competence, my very humanity all viciously attacked. My dignity was stripped away in that sterile hospital hallway, and I felt utterly discarded, invisible, profoundly disrespected. Yet as despair threatened to swallow me whole, something deep within me stirred. What Sarah, Michael, and the others didn't know was that I had been keeping meticulous notes, documenting every cruel exchange, every calculated exclusion. And hidden cameras in my home had captured their whispered conversations, their cold plotting to erase me from Lily's life completely. This time, their insidious alienation wouldn't just unravel, it would expose their shocking lack of humanity and restore my rightful place as a grandmother who had given everything for her family. 3 days after Lily's birth and my banishment from the hospital, I gathered every ounce of courage I had left and drove to Michael and Sarah's home. My hands trembled as I knocked on the door I had helped them buy, using my retirement savings for their down payment. The irony wasn't lost on me as I stood there begging for entry into a house I had made possible. Sarah answered the door with that chillingly calm smile I'd come to recognize as her weapon of choice. She stood there in her pristine robe, looking refreshed despite having given birth just days before, while I felt like I'd aged 10 years in those same 3 days. "Oh, Dorothy," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I wasn't expecting you." Behind her, I could see Michael pacing in the living room. His face strained his eyes, avoiding mine completely. This was my son, the boy who used to run to me when he had nightmares, who called me his hero when I worked double shifts to pay for his baseball equipment. Now he couldn't even look at me. "Sarah, please," I said, my voice breaking, despite my efforts to stay composed. "I just want to hold my granddaughter. I've been a pediatric nurse for 30 years. I know how to handle babies. I raised Michael all by myself, and he turned out just fine." Sarah's expression shifted, and I saw something cold and calculating flash in her eyes. "Dorothy, you need to understand something," she said, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. "My mother gets to hold Lily first. She has real experience with newborns. You're just the other grandmother. And Dorothy, you are absolutely not to post any photos of Lily on Facebook. This is my baby. You're being selfish for even asking. You have no humanity to understand my needs as a new mother." The words hit me like physical blows. Other grandmother I had delivered dozens of babies had been there for Michael's first breath, first steps, first words. How could my own professional experience be dismissed so casually? Michael, I called out, my voice cracking with desperation. You know my heart. I've cared for countless newborns, loved you from the moment you were born. My experience is meant to help, not interfere. How can you deny me a bond with my own grandchild? Michael finally looked at me, but his eyes were cold, distant. Mom, you're being selfish and insensitive. Sarah just gave birth. You're putting pressure on her when she needs rest and support. You need to respect her wishes. Stop being so dramatic about this. This is her baby, her rules. You're losing your mind over something so simple. His words were like daggers. Losing my mind, I was a healthcare professional, a woman who had dedicated her life to caring for others. How had I become the villain in this story? Before I could respond, I heard small footsteps on the stairs. Ethan, my 12-year-old grandson, appeared, but instead of running to hug me like he used to, he physically pulled away when I reached for him. Go away, Grandma, he said, his voice harsh and unfamiliar. Mom says you're toxic, you're crazy. I staggered backward as if he'd struck me. Ethan, sweetheart, what are you saying? I'm your grandmother who taught you to ride a bike, who made you chocolate chip cookies every Sunday. But he was already turning away, coached by whispers I couldn't hear, but could feel in the air around us. Then Chloe, my 8-year-old granddaughter, appeared at the top of the stairs, her little face scrunched up in confusion and fear. Mommy says you're a monster, she cried out before running back to her room. The sound of her bedroom door slamming echoed through the house like a gunshot. These were the children I had rocked to sleep, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose birthday parties I had organized and funded. Now they were looking at me like I was a stranger, a threat to their family. But the cruelest blow came later that evening. As I sat in my empty house trying to process what had happened, I saw it on Facebook. Brenda, Sarah's mother, had posted a photo of herself holding Lily, my granddaughter, with the caption, "First cuddles with my precious granddaughter, Lily, a grandmother's true love." The photo had dozens of likes and comments, people congratulating Brenda on her new role. I stared at that screen until my eyes burned with tears. First cuddles, true love. The words mocked every sacrifice I had made, every sleepless night I had spent caring for Michael, every dream I had harbored about being a grandmother. Within the week, the isolation campaign intensified. My phone calls went unanswered. Text messages were ignored. When I tried to visit again, no one came to the door, though I could see cars in the driveway and lights on inside the house. Then came the letter. Mr. Davies, their lawyer, sent a formal notice on crisp letterhead. Any attempt to contact the children will be considered harassment and grounds for a restraining order. Mrs. Dorothy Johnson is hereby warned that further contact will result in legal action. I read those words over and over, each reading making them more surreal. I was being treated like a criminal, a danger to my own family. Me, a woman who had spent her career protecting children, who had sacrificed everything for her son. As I sat in my kitchen that night, surrounded by photos of Michael as a baby, of happy family gatherings, of birthday parties and Christmas mornings, I felt something die inside me. But in that death, something else was born, a cold, determined anger that whispered one word over and over: justice. The psychological warfare escalated with surgical precision. Sarah refused me any access to Lily, not even supervised visits. She claimed I was too emotionally unstable to be around a newborn, spreading this narrative to anyone who would listen. Meanwhile, Brenda's social media presence became a daily torture for me. She posted carefully manipulated photos from family gatherings, images where I had clearly been cropped out or positioned to look peripheral, unimportant. But the cruelest attack came when Sarah began questioning my past parenting publicly. At a family gathering I wasn't invited to, she told relatives that I had been overly strict and lacked empathy when raising Michael. She painted a picture of me as a cold, controlling mother who had somehow damaged my son. These lies spread through our extended family like poison, undermining 30 years of loving sacrifice. The physical toll was devastating. I lost 15 pounds in 2 months. My hands shook constantly, and I couldn't sleep more than 2 hours at a time. My doctor prescribed anxiety medication, but nothing could calm the storm raging inside me. I was being systematically erased from my own family's story. Then came the discovery that broke something fundamental inside me. When I went to Michael's house to drop off a birthday gift for Chloe, a gift that would probably be thrown away unopened, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Through the window, I could see into Lily's nursery. The handmade layette I had spent months crocheting, working on every evening after my hospital shifts was gone. The mobile I had crafted with tiny nurses and doctors celebrating my career and my hopes for Lily's future had been replaced. Even the photos of Michael as a baby, pictures I had taken and given to them, had been removed from the walls. It was as if I had never existed, as if my love and my history meant nothing. But the moment that shattered my remaining faith in my son came when I was leaving their house. I heard Sarah on the phone through an open window, her voice cold and calculating. The old hag thinks she can manipulate us with her guilt trips. Well, she's got another thing coming. Lily is mine, and Dorothy is just the other grandmother. She's getting exactly what she deserves for being so pushy all these years. The casual cruelty in her voice, the way she referred to me as the old hag, made me realize that this wasn't just about control. This was about completely erasing my existence, denying my decades of love and sacrifice, rewriting history to make me the villain. That night alone in my house, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just months before. I opened my computer and began typing. I was going to reveal the truth about my sacrifices, the depths of my love that had been thrown back in my face like garbage. The story I had to tell was one I had never planned to share, a secret I had guarded for over 20 years. When Michael was 25, he had fallen into a gambling addiction that nearly destroyed his life. Online poker, sports betting, casino nights with friends that turned into desperate attempts to win back mounting losses. He had accumulated over $150,000 in debt money. He didn't have money he had borrowed from dangerous people who weren't patient about repayment. But it was worse than just debt. In his desperation, Michael had gotten involved in illegal activities. He was helping to launder money for his creditors, using his position at the bank, where he worked to move funds and hide transactions. When the investigation began, he faced serious criminal charges that would have destroyed his career, his reputation, and his future. I found out about all of this when Michael came to me broken and terrified, begging for help. He was my son, my baby, and I couldn't bear to see him destroyed by his mistakes. So I used my life savings, over $75,000, that was meant for my retirement to help pay off his debts. I used my medical connections to arrange a discreet medical leave from his job, creating documentation that would explain his absence during the legal proceedings. I even helped fabricate records to support his claim that he had been suffering from depression and anxiety conditions that would explain his poor judgment without destroying his professional reputation. The worst part was watching him in court, seeing him lie under oath about his mental state, knowing that I had helped him construct those lies. I had compromised my own integrity, my professional ethics, everything I believed in, to save him from the consequences of his actions. and I never told him the full extent of what I had done. He knew I had helped financially, but he didn't know about the fabricated medical records, the strings I had pulled, the favors I had called in. I let him believe that he had worked through his problems on his own, that he had earned his second chance. That sacrifice had cost me my retirement security, my peace of mind, and my faith in my own moral compass. But I had told myself it was worth it because I was protecting my son's future, ensuring that he could have the life and family he deserved. Now, as I sat in my empty house, banned from that same family, I wondered if I had been a fool. Had my sacrifice enabled his weakness? Had my willingness to compromise my values taught him that actions don't have consequences? When I tried to subtly reference my past sacrifices during one of our final conversations, hoping to remind him of the depth of my love, Michael's response was brutal. "Mom, you're always trying to make me feel guilty with your so-called sacrifices. Your past choices are your own business. Sarah says you're just trying to manipulate us with guilt trips, and she's right. You need to stop living in the past and accept that this is how things are now." Brenda, who had been listening from the kitchen, added her own poison. "Honestly, Dorothy, you're getting quite paranoid about all this. We're actually worried about your mental health. You seem to be twisting history to make yourself look like some kind of martyr. It's really concerning." But the cruelest blow came from Ethan, my grandson, who had been listening from the doorway. He looked at me with the same cold indifference I had seen in his father's eyes and said, "Grandma, you're acting crazy. Why don't you just die already?" The words hung in the air like a curse. This child, who I had held as a newborn, who had called me his favorite person in the world, was now telling me to die. The corruption of his innocent heart felt like the ultimate violation. That night, I received a call from Mr. Davies with their solution. If I would sign a binding agreement permanently relinquishing all grandparent visitation rights and agree to a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation, Sarah would graciously allow me to send supervised pre-approved letters to the grandchildren twice a year. The evaluation was designed to prove my incompetence to create a legal record of my mental instability that would justify their actions. I hung up the phone and sat in my darkened living room, surrounded by 30 years of memories that had been reduced to manipulation and guilt trips. But in that darkness, I felt something new growing inside me. It wasn't the desperate love of a mother anymore. It was something colder, more calculating. It was the determination of a woman who had been pushed too far, who had finally realized that sometimes love requires justice, and justice requires truth. The final act of banishment came with the cold efficiency of a legal execution. I received a formal letter from Mr. Davies, typed on official letterhead, confirming the permanent termination of my grandparent visitation rights. The court had accepted their motion for a temporary restraining order based on child endangerment and emotional harassment terms that made me sound like a criminal predator rather than a loving grandmother. The letter was clinical in its cruelty. Mrs. Dorothy Johnson is hereby prohibited from coming within 500 feet of the minor children, their residence, or their school. Any violation of this order will result in immediate arrest and prosecution to the full extent of the law. I read those words over and over, each reading making them more surreal. I was now legally forbidden from approaching my own grandchildren. In the eyes of the law, I was a danger to the babies I had helped bring into this world, a threat to the family I had sacrificed everything to protect. But I couldn't let it end like this. Despite the legal warnings, despite the risk of arrest, I had to try one more time. I spent weeks putting together a photo album, a collection of every precious memory I had documented over the years. Pictures of Michael as a baby, his first steps, his graduation, his wedding day, when he had looked at me with such love and gratitude. Photos of Ethan and Chloe growing up birthday parties. I had organized Christmas mornings. I had made magical with my careful planning and generous gifts. And scattered throughout were the few photos I had managed to take of Lily during those brief moments before my banishment. Her tiny fingers wrapped around mine, her sleepy face peaceful in my arms. I had captured these moments with the desperate intensity of someone who knew they might be the last. I wrote a letter to accompany the album, pouring my heart onto paper with the same care I had once used to document patient charts. I told them about the nights I had stayed up when Michael had colic, about the way I had worked double shifts to pay for his baseball equipment, about the pride I had felt watching him graduate from college. I reminded them of family traditions, of inside jokes, of the 1,000 small moments that make up a life of love. I left the package on their doorstep anonymously, my hands shaking as I placed it there. It was my final plea, my last attempt to reach the hearts I had helped shape. 3 days later, I saw Brenda's social media post. She had photographed my album torn and cut up, scattered across her dining room table like garbage. The caption read, "Cleaning out the clutter. Some people just can't let go of the past. Moving forward from negativity and desperate attempts to manipulate." The photos I had treasured, the memories I had carefully preserved, had been destroyed with the same casual cruelty they had shown me. But it was the comments that truly broke me. Family members I had known for decades, people who had eaten at my table and celebrated in my home, liked the post and added their own cruel observations about my obsession and inability to move on. Michael's response came as a text message, cold and final. "Consider this closed, Mom. Don't contact us again, ever. You're causing too much trouble with your obsession. We're done." The word obsession cut like a blade. My love for my family, my desire to be part of their lives, had been reduced to pathology. I was now officially the crazy ex-grandmother, the cautionary tale they would tell about boundary violations and mental instability. But Sarah wasn't content with simple banishment. She began calling mutual acquaintances, spreading rumors about my mental health, my inappropriate behavior, my dangerous fixation on the children. She painted herself as the victim, the poor daughter-in-law who had been terrorized by her unstable mother-in-law. People I had known for years began crossing the street to avoid me whispering behind their hands when they saw me in the grocery store. The final humiliation came when I encountered Chloe at the library. She was there with Brenda, and when she saw me, she didn't run away or cry. Instead, she laughed a sound that was shocking in its casual cruelty. "Grandma, you're so crazy," she said loud enough for others to hear. "Why don't you just die already?" Those words from the mouth of my 8-year-old granddaughter felt like the final nail in my coffin. I had become the monster in their story, the villain whose removal made their lives better. That night, I sat in my therapist's office and finally revealed the secret I had carried for 2 decades, the one truth that would expose the cosmic irony of my situation. My voice was barely a whisper as I told her about Lily, about the fertility treatments, about the elaborate deception I had helped orchestrate. Michael, my son, was infertile. He had been injured in a childhood accident damage that had gone undiagnosed until Sarah's fertility struggles brought it to light. The revelation had devastated him, threatened his sense of masculinity and self-worth. Sarah, desperate for a child and terrified of losing Michael, had secretly used a sperm donor at a fertility clinic. I had discovered the truth through my medical connections, through careful observation and the kind of analytical thinking that had made me a good nurse. But instead of confronting them, instead of demanding honesty, I had chosen to protect them both. I had secretly financed the procedure $20,000 from my already depleted savings. I had helped Sarah cover her clinic visits, provided medical explanations for her appointments, and crafted a flawless narrative that would allow Michael to believe he was Lily's biological father. I had even helped falsify some of the timing to make the conception story more believable. But the most painful part was the silence. I had never told Michael the truth about his infertility, never burdened him with the knowledge that might have crushed him. Instead, I had watched him celebrate his virility, his pride in making a baby, while knowing that Lily's existence was the result of medical intervention and donor sperm. I had sacrificed my own ethical standards, my belief in honesty and transparency, to protect his fragile male ego. I had become complicit in a deception that went against everything I believed in, all because I couldn't bear to see my son suffer. And now that same son was calling me mentally unstable, was allowing his wife to ban me from the life of a child whose existence I had made possible. The granddaughter I had helped create through my sacrifice and deception was being used as a weapon against me. The irony was so complete, so perfectly cruel, that I could barely breathe. Sarah's accusations of interference and toxic behavior took on a new dimension when viewed against the backdrop of my ultimate sacrifice. I had interfered all right. I had interfered to make their happiness possible, to give them the child they desperately wanted to protect them from a truth that might have destroyed their marriage. And this was my reward: banishment, humiliation, the systematic destruction of every relationship I had built, every memory I had cherished, every hope I had nurtured. But as I sat in that therapist's office, as I finally spoke the truth that had been eating at me for 2 decades, I felt something shift inside me. The desperate, pleading grandmother was gone. In her place was a woman who had been pushed beyond her breaking point, who had finally realized that sometimes love requires justice, and justice requires truth. They thought they had destroyed me, but they had actually freed me. Free from the burden of protecting them, free from the obligation to sacrifice my own integrity for their comfort, free from the illusion that love alone could heal the wounds they had inflicted. I had been a fool, but I was done being foolish. It was time for the truth to come out, all of it. Time for them to learn what they had really done, what they had really destroyed, and what they had really thrown away. The reckoning was coming, and it would be more complete than they could possibly imagine. The silence that followed my banishment was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't just the absence of phone calls or visits. It was the suffocating weight of carrying a secret that could destroy the very people who had destroyed me. I sat in my empty house, surrounded by the ghosts of family gatherings, knowing that Lily wasn't even Michael's biological child, that I had helped orchestrate the greatest deception of their lives, and that this knowledge was eating me alive from the inside out. The isolation became a psychological prison. Every day, I woke up questioning my own memories, my own choices, my own sanity. Had I really sacrificed so much for them? Had I imagined the depth of our bond? The public accusations of being a toxic influence began to feel like truth. Maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe my love had become obsession. My care had become control. The line between reality and their narrative began to blur in the most terrifying way. But Sarah and Brenda weren't content with simple banishment. They began a calculated campaign to destroy not just my family relationships, but my professional reputation as well. Brenda, with her network of social connections, began subtly leaking details about my erratic behavior to pediatric nursing associations and child development networks. She painted a picture of a former nurse experiencing cognitive decline, someone with unstable emotional attachments to children who could no longer be trusted around the vulnerable. The whispers started small. Former colleagues began mentioning concerns about my mental state. Professional groups that had once welcomed my expertise suddenly found reasons to cancel my invitations to speak at conferences. My name was quietly removed from advisory boards and medical consulting lists. The reputation I had built over 30 years of dedicated service was being systematically dismantled by innuendo and half-truths. The medical community is small, and gossip travels fast. Soon I was receiving calls from professional organizations asking me to step back from various commitments due to recent concerns about my psychological stability. These weren't official accusations, nothing I could fight directly. They were just quiet suggestions, polite requests to withdraw from public professional life for my own good and the good of the profession. The financial pressure was mounting as well. The legal fees from trying to defend myself against the visitation termination were astronomical. Mr. Davies, their lawyer, seemed to have unlimited resources, filing motion after motion that required expensive responses. My retirement savings, already depleted from helping Michael years earlier, dwindled rapidly. Then came the defamation lawsuit. Sarah claimed that my attempts to maintain contact with the grandchildren, my letters and phone calls, constituted harassment that had caused her severe emotional distress. She was seeking damages for the mental anguish I had caused by trying to be part of my grandchildren's lives. The irony was so complete, it was almost funny. Almost. My bank accounts were frozen during the legal proceedings. Without access to my own money, without income from the professional work that had been taken from me, I couldn't keep up with my mortgage payments. The house that had been my sanctuary, filled with photos and memories of raising Michael, was put up for auction to cover my mounting debts. I remember the day of the auction with crystalline clarity. Strangers walked through my home, picking through my belongings like vultures. The rocking chair where I had nursed Michael through childhood illnesses sold for $20. The dining room table where we had celebrated every birthday and holiday went for $50. A lifetime of memories reduced to pocket change for bargain hunters. Brenda attended the auction, not to bid, but to watch. She stood in my driveway with a small smile, taking photos on her phone as my possessions were loaded into strangers' cars. When our eyes met, she gave me a little wave as if we were old friends, greeting each other at a pleasant social event. I was forced to move into a crowded public shelter, sharing a room with 3 other women who had also lost everything. The irony wasn't lost on me. I, who had spent my career caring for others, was now dependent on the charity of overworked social workers and well-meaning volunteers who saw me as just another elderly woman who had failed to plan properly for her future. But the cruelest blow was yet to come. Michael and Sarah, in a move so calculated it took my breath away, used Emily and Ethan in a public relations stunt for a local child protection charity. The event was covered by local media, and I watched from the shelter's common room as my grandchildren spoke about the importance of protecting children from difficult people. Emily, now 12 years old, stood at a podium that she could barely reach and read a carefully prepared speech about brave parents who put their children's safety first. She talked about the courage it takes to make hard decisions to protect young minds from negative influences. She never mentioned my name, but the implication was clear to anyone who knew our situation. The camera focused on her innocent face as she spoke about families that had to create boundaries to keep children safe. Watching her recite those words, knowing that someone had coached her to say them, knowing that she probably didn't even understand what she was really saying, felt like watching my own heart being cut out on live television. Ethan's contribution was a drawing he had made of his happy family. It showed stick figures labeled Mommy, Daddy, Emily, Lily, and Grandma Brenda. There was no figure labeled Grandma Dorothy. In his 8-year-old artistic vision, I simply didn't exist anymore. The reporter asked him about his picture, and Ethan explained with the casual confidence of a child that this was everyone who mattered in his life. "These are the people who take care of me," he said, pointing to each figure. When asked if there was anyone missing, he thought for a moment and then shook his head. "Nope, this is everybody." I sat in that shelter common room, surrounded by other broken women, and felt something inside me die. These children, who I had loved before they were born, who I had rocked to sleep and taught to ride bikes, had been programmed to erase me so completely that I didn't even register as a missing piece in their family picture. But in my darkest moment, when I was seriously considering whether it would be easier to just give up entirely, an unexpected lifeline appeared. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a former colleague I had mentored 20 years earlier when she was just starting her career as a pediatric nurse practitioner, contacted me through the shelter's social worker. Rebecca had heard about my situation through the professional grapevine, and she was appalled. She remembered me as a dedicated mentor who had helped her navigate the challenges of early career nursing. She had built a successful practice in pediatric care, and she absolutely refused to believe that I was the unstable, dangerous person being described in the whispers and rumors. More importantly, she offered concrete help. Rebecca had connections with a network of retired legal professionals who specialized in elder fraud and emotional manipulation. She also offered financial support to help me fight the legal battles that were draining my resources. "Dorothy," she said during our first phone call, "I know who you are. I know your heart. I know your dedication to children and families. What they're doing to you is wrong, and we're going to fight it." For the first time in months, I felt something other than despair. It wasn't hope, exactly not yet, but it was determination, a fierce, desperate resolve that whispered that maybe, just maybe, the truth could still matter. Maybe justice was still possible. Maybe the woman who had dedicated her life to protecting children could find a way to protect herself. The ultimate professional humiliation came 6 months later, delivered with the kind of sophisticated cruelty that only people with resources and connections can orchestrate. Michael and Sarah, leveraging his growing reputation and her network of child psychology contacts, announced they would be hosting a national modern parenting and emotional wellness seminar. The promotional materials were impressive. Glossy brochures featuring Michael in a crisp suit, described as a visionary parent who had revolutionized his approach to child rearing. Sarah was presented as a child wellness advocate with expertise in protecting young minds from emotional manipulation. The seminar promised to teach parents how to foster true independence and guard against over-involvement from well-meaning but misguided influences. I learned about the seminar from Rebecca, who had seen the advertisements in professional journals. She brought me the promotional material at the shelter, her face grim with anger. "Dorothy, you need to see this," she said, spreading the brochures across the common room table. "They're using your situation as a case study." The agenda was horrifying in its implications. Michael was scheduled to give the keynote address on breaking free from generational patterns of over-involvement. Sarah would lead a workshop on recognizing and addressing toxic grandparent relationships. There was even a panel discussion on legal remedies for protecting children from emotionally unstable extended family members. They were turning my destruction into a business opportunity, packaging my pain as educational content for other parents who might be dealing with difficult grandparents. My lifetime of professional dedication was being reframed as a cautionary tale about the dangers of loving too much. I managed to watch parts of the seminar through a live stream at the public library, sitting at a computer station between a homeless man checking his email and a teenager doing homework. The irony of watching my son destroy my reputation while I sat among society's forgotten was not lost on me. Michael took the stage with confidence, his presentation polished and professional. He never mentioned me by name, but he didn't need to. He spoke about a family member who had struggled with boundaries and inappropriate emotional investment in his children. He described someone whose professional background in childcare had led to controlling behaviors and difficulty accepting parental authority. Sometimes, he said, looking directly into the camera, the people who claim to love our children the most are the ones who can cause the most damage. Professional experience doesn't always translate to appropriate family relationships. Sometimes love becomes obsession and care becomes control. The audience nodded thoughtfully, taking notes, as my son systematically dismantled everything I had ever stood for. He presented himself as a brave parent who had made the difficult decision to protect his children from my toxic influence, even though it meant cutting ties with someone who had contributed significantly to his upbringing. Sarah's workshop was even worse. She spoke with clinical detachment about manipulative tactics used by emotionally unstable grandparents. She described someone who used guilt about past sacrifices and professional credentials to justify inappropriate involvement in child-rearing decisions. The most dangerous grandparents, she said with authority, are the ones who truly believe they're helping. They use their love as a weapon, their experience as justification for undermining parental authority. They wrap their control in the language of care, making it difficult for parents to set appropriate boundaries. I sat in that library chair, my hands shaking, as I watched this woman I had helped in so many ways describe me as a predator. She was using textbook psychology to pathologize my love, turning every gesture of care into evidence of dysfunction. But the cruelest part was yet to come. Emily appeared in a pre-recorded video that was shown to the audience. She was now 12, poised and articulate, speaking about her journey toward independence and her family's commitment to healthy boundaries. I used to think that having more people involved in my life meant having more love, she said, reading from a script with the careful pronunciation of a child who had been well coached. But I've learned that sometimes too much attention can be overwhelming. I'm grateful that my parents helped me understand the difference between healthy care and problematic involvement. She never said my name, but she didn't need to. My own granddaughter was telling an audience of hundreds that I had been problematic, that my love had been overwhelming, that she was better off without me. The child I had held as a baby, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose bedtime stories I had told, was publicly rejecting everything I had ever been to her. Ethan's contribution was a short video clip that sent the audience into appreciative laughter. He was shown in his room pointing at an old nursing textbook that had somehow made its way into the background of the shot. "Grandma used to read from this," he said with exaggerated amazement. So old-fashioned, we prefer learning things the modern way. The implication was clear. My professional knowledge gained through decades of study and practice was outdated and irrelevant. The methods I had used to care for children, the techniques that had saved lives and comforted families, were being dismissed as antiquated by my own grandson. I watched my family's systematic destruction of my legacy unfold in real-time broadcast to professionals across the country. Every principle I had held dear, every method I had used to help children, every sacrifice I had made for my family was being reframed as evidence of my inadequacy and instability. The seminar was a huge success. The attendees praised Michael and Sarah for their courage in sharing such a difficult family situation for educational purposes. Professional organizations reached out to invite them to speak at future conferences. They were being celebrated as experts in family wellness, their expertise built on the bones of my destroyed reputation. But not everyone was convinced. Dr. Patricia Hendricks, a retired school principal who had worked with me years earlier when Ethan and Emily were in elementary school, watched the seminar with growing disgust. She remembered me as a devoted grandmother who had volunteered countless hours at school events, who had always been respectful of teachers and administrators, who had clearly adored her grandchildren. Dr. Hendricks reached out to Rebecca, expressing her willingness to provide professional testimony about my character and my interactions with the children. She had kept detailed records from her years as principal, including notes about family dynamics and grandparent involvement. Her files painted a picture very different from the one Michael and Sarah were presenting. "I've seen a lot of family situations in my 40 years in education," she told Rebecca. Dorothy was one of the most appropriate, loving grandparents I ever encountered. What they're describing simply doesn't match the woman I knew. Something is very wrong here. As I sat in the library that day, watching my son profit from my destruction, I felt the last of my hope die. But in its place, something harder and colder began to grow. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully erased me and rewritten our family history to serve their purposes. But they had made one crucial mistake. In their arrogance, in their certainty that they had destroyed me completely, they had become careless. And carelessness, I was about to discover, leaves evidence. Evidence that could unravel their carefully constructed narrative and expose them for what they really were. The final financial assault came with the precision of a military operation. Michael, working with Sarah and their legal team, launched a coordinated attack designed to strip away the last vestiges of my independence and dignity. The $1 million lawsuit for emotional distress was just the beginning. The lawsuit alleged that my harassment and defamatory statements about Sarah had damaged Michael's reputation and caused severe psychological trauma to the entire family. They claimed that my attempts to maintain contact with my grandchildren had created a climate of fear that required extensive therapy for all family members. The damages they sought weren't just punitive. They were designed to ensure I could never recover financially, never have the resources to fight back. But the lawsuit was merely the public face of their strategy. Behind the scenes, Michael used his position in the financial services industry to attack the very foundations of my economic security. He contacted my former hospital's pension administration, claiming to have serious concerns about my mental competence and suggesting that I might be mismanaging my retirement benefits. The pension administrators, faced with official-sounding allegations from a family member, initiated a formal review of my mental capacity. They suspended my monthly payments pending a psychiatric evaluation that would determine whether I was competent to manage my own affairs. Without my pension, I had no income. Without income, I couldn't afford the legal representation I needed to fight their accusations. Simultaneously, Michael contacted the state nursing board, filing a formal complaint alleging that I had demonstrated erratic behavior and poor judgment that raised questions about my past professional conduct. He claimed that my obsessive behavior toward his family suggested underlying mental health issues that might have affected my patient care during my career. The nursing board, obligated to investigate any allegations of professional misconduct, launched their own review. They suspended my professional credentials pending their investigation, effectively stripping away the licenses and certifications I had earned through decades of dedicated service. More devastatingly, they revoked my professional honors and removed my name from the hospital's wall of excellence, where it had hung for 15 years. The symbolism was complete. I had gone from being a celebrated healthcare professional to someone whose very competence was in question. My name was being erased from every professional achievement. I had earned every recognition. I had received every legacy I had built. The financial pressure mounted with each passing day. Legal bills consumed what little remained in my accounts. The shelter where I was staying could only provide temporary housing, and my time was running out. I was facing the prospect of living on the streets, a homeless woman with no resources, no family, and no professional standing. The eviction from my last remaining accommodation was timed for maximum humiliation. Brenda made sure that local media would be present, calling in a tip about an elderly woman being removed from transitional housing due to inability to manage her affairs. The news crew captured footage of me carrying my few remaining possessions in garbage bags, the ultimate visual symbol of how far I had fallen. The reporter described me as a former healthcare worker who had fallen on hard times due to family disputes and financial mismanagement. There was no mention of my professional achievements, my decades of service, or the circumstances that had led to my homelessness. I was just another sad story of an elderly person who had failed to plan properly for her future. Michael and Sarah's response to my homelessness was chilling in its calculated indifference. When contacted by a reporter for comment, Michael issued a carefully worded statement. "While we're saddened by my mother's current situation, we have no legal or moral obligation to support someone who has repeatedly violated our family's boundaries and refused to respect our wishes for our children's welfare." Sarah's social media posts during this period were particularly cruel. She shared photos of family outings and celebrations, always careful to mention how blessed she felt to have such a supportive family network and how important it was to protect positive energy in their home. The implication was clear: they were happier and healthier without me. But Brenda's response was the most devastating. Using money that had originally come from Michael's increased financial success, money that traced back to my own sacrifices and support over the years, she purchased a luxury item for the family. It was a custom-built playhouse for the backyard designed to look like a miniature hospital and dedicated to encouraging Emily's interest in healthcare careers. The dedication ceremony was covered by local media, with Brenda giving interviews about the importance of nurturing children's dreams and providing positive role models. She spoke about Sarah's vision for creating an environment where children could explore their interests without negative influences from the past. The playhouse cost more than I had earned in my final year as a nurse. It was built with money that ultimately traced back to my own financial sacrifices, dedicated to encouraging a career path I had blazed in honor of a woman who had systematically destroyed my relationship with my family. The irony was so complete, it was almost artistic in its cruelty. The stress of the financial assault, combined with the emotional trauma of watching my grandchildren celebrate my erasure, took a severe physical toll. I began experiencing chest pains and shortness of breath. My blood pressure spiked to dangerous levels. I was losing weight rapidly, unable to eat or sleep properly. The heart attack came suddenly striking me down in the shelter's common room as I was reading a letter from the nursing board officially revoking my licenses. One moment I was sitting in a plastic chair, the next I was on the floor clutching my chest as pain radiated down my left arm. The paramedics arrived quickly, but my condition was critical. As they worked on me in the ambulance, I heard one of them radio the hospital, elderly female, massive MI vitals, unstable, possible DNR situation. They were treating me like someone whose life might not be worth saving another homeless person, whose death would be unfortunate, but not unexpected. In the emergency room, as they worked to stabilize my heart, I drifted in and out of consciousness. In those moments between awareness and oblivion, a memory surfaced sharp and clear despite the years that had passed. I was back in my office 20 years earlier, conducting a family counseling session for a troubled case. A mother had brought her teenage daughter in, claiming the girl was emotionally disturbed and needed residential treatment. But as I listened to their interactions, I recognized something disturbing in the mother's behavior. She was systematically undermining her daughter's reality, contradicting the girl's memories, reframing her emotional responses as symptoms of mental illness. The mother spoke with authority about her daughter's problems, using clinical language and presenting herself as a concerned parent dealing with a difficult child. But I could see what was really happening. The mother was gaslighting her daughter, using the mental health system to validate her own need for control. She was turning the girl's natural adolescent struggles into evidence of pathology, using professional authority to justify emotional abuse. I had tried to intervene to provide support for the daughter and education for the mother, but the mother had been too skilled, too convincing. She had manipulated other professionals, built a narrative that painted her as the long-suffering parent of a disturbed child. Eventually, the daughter had been placed in residential care, separated from any support system that might have helped her see the truth. The case had haunted me for years, but I had suppressed the memory, filed it away with other painful professional experiences. Now lying in that hospital bed, the connection was crystal clear. Sarah's behavior toward me mirrored exactly what that mother had done to her daughter. The same systematic undermining of reality, the same use of clinical language to pathologize normal emotions, the same manipulation of professional systems to validate abuse. I had been professionally trained to recognize these patterns, but I had been too close to the situation, too emotionally invested to see them clearly when I was the victim. Now, with the clarity that comes from nearly dying, I understood exactly what had been done to me. The revelation gave me something I hadn't felt in months, a sense of purpose. I wasn't just a victim of family cruelty. I was a professional who had been systematically manipulated by someone using techniques I had been trained to identify and counter. My suffering wasn't just personal. It was a case study in sophisticated emotional abuse. And if it was a case study, then it could be documented, analyzed, and exposed. The truth could be revealed not just about what they had done to me, but about what Sarah was capable of doing to others. My near-death experience hadn't ended my story. It had given me the clarity to understand what the real story was. Recovery from the heart attack was slow and painful, but it gave me time to think with a clarity I hadn't possessed in years. The hospital room became my fortress, a place where I could plan without the constant pressure of survival that had consumed me in the shelter. Rebecca visited daily, bringing updates from the legal team and helping me piece together the evidence we would need. It was during this recovery period that I decided to create a video message for Michael. Not a plea, not an emotional appeal, but a presentation of facts that even he couldn't ignore. I had spent my career documenting patient care with meticulous precision, and I would apply those same skills to documenting the truth about what his wife had done to our family. With Rebecca's help, I recorded a 20-minute video that laid out the timeline of Sarah's manipulation with clinical precision. I played the audio recordings I had made of Sarah's early statements about excluding me from Lily's life, her cruel remarks about my interference, and her chilling boasts about having total control over the children's relationships. But the most damning evidence was what I had remembered during my medical crisis. I had documentation from that old family counseling case records that showed the exact patterns of behavior that Sarah was using against me. The parallels were so precise, they could have been copied from a textbook on emotional manipulation. I also revealed for the first time the full truth about Lily's conception, not to destroy Michael, but to show him how thoroughly he had been manipulated. Sarah had used his infertility as a secret weapon, creating a child through deception, and then using that child to control and isolate him from anyone who might question her authority. Michael. I said into the camera, my voice steady despite my physical weakness. I helped create the life you treasure most because I love you. I kept your secret because I wanted to protect your dignity. I sacrificed my own ethical standards because I couldn't bear to see you suffer, and now that same child is being used to justify my destruction. Can you really believe that's what I deserve? The message was compassionate but unflinching. I wasn't asking for forgiveness or pleading for reconciliation. I was presenting evidence and asking him to consider whether the woman he had married was capable of the cruelty the evidence suggested. Rebecca helped me send the video through a secure channel that would ensure Michael received it personally. We timed the delivery for a moment when Sarah would likely be out of the house, giving him the opportunity to watch it privately and make his own decision about how to respond. But we had underestimated Sarah's surveillance of my activities. Through contacts at the hospital, through monitoring of my communications, through the network of people she had convinced to watch me for concerning behavior, she knew about the video before Michael ever saw it. Sarah intercepted the message through a combination of technical skill and strategic manipulation. She had convinced Michael to give her access to his email accounts as part of their unified approach to dealing with my harassment. When the video arrived, she was the first to see it. What she did next demonstrated a level of sophisticated cruelty that took my breath away. Sarah didn't just delete the video. She downloaded it, took it to a professional video editing service, and had it manipulated to serve her purposes. The edited version removed all context and evidence. My carefully presented facts were cut out, leaving only the emotional moments where I spoke about my pain and confusion. The audio was subtly altered to make my voice sound more desperate, more unstable. Background noise was added to create an atmosphere of chaos and mental disturbance. Most devastatingly, she spliced in segments from different parts of the recording to create statements I had never made. Through careful editing, she made it appear that I was threatening the family, demanding money, and making wild accusations based on paranoid delusions. Sarah then sold this manipulated video to a national news organization as evidence of my deteriorating mental state. She framed it as a cautionary tale about elderly people who become obsessed with family members and refuse to accept appropriate boundaries. The story aired on a primetime news magazine show with the headline, "When Grandparents Become Dangerous." I watched from my hospital bed as my own words were used to destroy me on national television. The narrator described me as a former healthcare worker whose professional background had given her dangerous knowledge about manipulation tactics that she was now using against her own family. Michael's response was swift and devastating. He appeared on the same program for a follow-up interview, presenting himself as a concerned son dealing with a mother's mental breakdown. He spoke with apparent anguish about his difficult decision to protect his children from my increasingly erratic behavior. "This video shows exactly why we had to take legal action," he said, his voice breaking with practiced emotion. "My mother is clearly not well, and we can't allow her instability to affect our children. It breaks my heart to see her this way, but we have to put our family's safety first." He brought Ethan on camera for a brief moment, and my grandson looked directly into the lens with the innocent concern of a child who had been well coached. "I hope Grandma gets better," he said softly, "but until she does, we need to stay safe." The performance was flawless. Michael came across as a loving son torn between filial duty and parental responsibility. Sarah remained strategically in the background, the grieving daughter-in-law who was too kind to speak publicly about her suffering, but whose pain was evident to anyone watching. Brenda appeared in the same segment, offering subtle nods of agreement and looks of sympathetic concern. She spoke briefly about the difficult position the family was in, dealing with someone they loved who had become threatening and unpredictable. "It's heartbreaking," she said with perfect sincerity, "but sometimes you have to make hard choices to protect the innocent. Sarah and Michael are being incredibly brave, and I support them completely." The story went viral. Social media was filled with comments supporting Michael and Sarah's courage in speaking out about elder abuse and family manipulation. I was held up as an example of how professional knowledge could be twisted by mental illness, how even trained caregivers could become dangers to the children they claimed to love. But not everyone was convinced. Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the retired principal who had worked with me years earlier, watched the program with growing outrage. She had kept detailed records from her time at the elementary school, including notes about family dynamics and observations about grandparent involvement. Her files told a very different story than the one being presented on television. She had documentation of my appropriate involvement in school activities, my respectful interactions with teachers, my obvious love for Ethan and Emily. She also had records of a concerning incident where Ethan had fallen at school and suffered bruising that Sarah had initially tried to blame on my rough handling during a visit. Dr. Hendricks had investigated that incident thoroughly at the time and determined that the bruising was consistent with a playground fall, not abuse. She had noted Sarah's eagerness to blame me and her apparent disappointment when the evidence didn't support her accusations. Now, watching Sarah's performance on television, Dr. Hendricks recognized the same pattern she had observed years earlier. She contacted Rebecca immediately, offering to provide testimony and documentation that could counter the narrative being presented in the media. "I've been in education for 40 years, she told Rebecca, "and I've seen real family dysfunction. What Dorothy is being accused of simply doesn't match the woman I observed. Someone is lying here, and I have the records to prove it." As I lay in that hospital bed, watching my final plea for truth being twisted into evidence of my instability, I felt something I had never experienced before. Not just anger or despair, but a cold, calculating fury that went beyond personal pain. They had taken my love and called it obsession. They had taken my sacrifice and called it manipulation. They had taken my professional expertise and called it dangerous knowledge. Now they had taken my truth and turned it into a weapon against me. But in their arrogance, in their certainty that they had finally destroyed me completely, they had made a crucial error. They had created evidence of their deception, left a trail of manipulation that could be traced and documented. The video editing, the coach testimonies, the coordinated media campaign, all of it required planning, communication, and the involvement of multiple people who might not be as committed to their lies as they were. The reckoning I had promised was no longer just a hope. It was an inevitability, because the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of surfacing. And I was no longer just a broken grandmother seeking justice. I was a trained professional with evidence allies and the bitter wisdom that comes from being systematically destroyed by people you trusted. They thought they had silenced me forever. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The federal lawsuit we filed attracted attention far beyond what any of us had anticipated. What had started as a family dispute had become a national conversation about elder abuse, parental alienation, and the sophisticated ways that vulnerable people can be systematically destroyed by those they trust most. Rebecca had helped me secure funding through a legal settlement I had forgotten about from a malpractice case years earlier, money that had been sitting in an account I hadn't accessed since my financial crisis began. Combined with support from a charitable fund that Dr. Hendricks had connected us with, we were able to hire a legal team that matched the resources Sarah and Michael had been using against me. Our lead attorney was Judge Margaret Chen, recently retired from the federal bench, who had specialized in family law and elder abuse cases. She was joined by Dr. Rebecca Martinez in her capacity as a child welfare advocate, and Dr. Patricia Hendricks, whose documentation would prove crucial to our case. Together, they filed a comprehensive lawsuit alleging elder abuse, financial fraud, defamation, and parental alienation charges that carried both civil and criminal penalties. The case drew national media attention because of the viral video that had been used to destroy my reputation. Legal experts debated whether edited footage could constitute evidence of fraud. Child welfare advocates discussed the ethics of using children as weapons in family disputes. The story had become bigger than just my personal tragedy. The trial was scheduled to be televised, a decision that Judge Chen felt was necessary to counter the damage done by the manipulated media coverage. Mrs. Johnson's reputation was destroyed in public, she argued. Justice demands that it be restored in public as well. When the trial began, the courtroom was packed with reporters, legal observers, and advocates who had been following the case. I sat at the plaintiff's table, no longer the broken woman who had been living in a shelter months earlier. The truth was about to be revealed, and I felt a calm determination that surprised me. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment when Judge Chen announced that we would be viewing evidence from my home security system. The hidden cameras I had installed months earlier, disguised as decorative picture frames, had captured everything. Every conversation, every moment of cruelty, every calculated act of manipulation had been recorded in crystal clear audio and video. The courtroom fell silent as the footage began to play on large screens visible to everyone present. The first clip showed Sarah in my living room speaking to Michael about their strategy for excluding me from Lily's life. Her voice was cold, calculating, completely different from the warm, concerned tone she used in public. "We need to make sure she has no legal standing," Sarah said on the recording. "If we can establish a pattern of inappropriate behavior, we can get a restraining order that will keep her away permanently. And once she's out of the picture, we'll have complete control over the children and the narrative." Michael's response was equally chilling. What about the money she spent on us over the years? Won't that complicate things? That actually works in our favor, Sarah replied with a laugh. We can frame her financial support as manipulation, as her trying to buy influence over our family. Her generosity becomes evidence of her controlling behavior. The courtroom gasped as the recording continued. Sarah detailed her plan to coach the children, to fear me to plant evidence of inappropriate behavior, and to use my professional background as a pediatric nurse against me by claiming I was overstepping boundaries. But the most damaging footage was yet to come. The cameras had captured Sarah and Brenda staging the photographs that would be used as evidence of my inappropriate behavior. They had deliberately created scenes that could be misinterpreted, carefully framing shots to make innocent interactions look suspicious. Most devastating of all was the recording of Sarah coaching Ethan and Chloe for their public appearances. The children, confused and frightened, were repeatedly told what to say about me. When Ethan asked why Grandma Dorothy was bad, Sarah's response was captured in horrifying detail. Grandma Dorothy is sick in her mind, Sarah told my 8-year-old grandson. She wants to take you away from Mommy and Daddy. When people ask you about her, you need to tell them she scares you. Can you do that for Mommy? The recording showed Ethan's confusion, his reluctance to say bad things about someone he loved. But Sarah persisted, using a combination of bribes and threats to ensure his compliance. The manipulation of these innocent children was so systematic, so coldly calculated, that several people in the courtroom were visibly weeping. The footage also revealed the financial motivation behind their actions. Sarah and Michael discussed the monthly support payments I had been providing, over $5,000, that had been helping to maintain their lifestyle. Sarah explicitly stated that eliminating me from their lives would require finding alternative sources of income, which led to discussions about increasing Michael's hours and pursuing legal settlements that could replace my financial contributions. Once the old woman is out of the picture, Sarah said in one particularly damaging clip, we'll have complete control over everything. The kids won't remember her interference, and we'll be free to raise them without her constant questioning of our decisions. When Sarah was called to testify, the confident, composed woman who had manipulated media interviews was nowhere to be seen. Confronted with footage of her own words, her own actions, her own systematic cruelty, she began to unravel on the witness stand. I didn't mean, she stammered, staring at the screens that showed her coaching children to reject their grandmother. You don't understand the context. She was interfering with our parenting. We had to protect our family. But as more footage played showing her laughing about my homelessness, joking about my health problems, and celebrating each legal victory that pushed me further toward destruction, Sarah's composure collapsed completely. She began sobbing uncontrollably, her carefully constructed public image crumbling before the watching world. I never meant for it to go this far, she wept. I just wanted her to back off. I never wanted her to get hurt. I never wanted her to almost die. The sight of her breakdown was simultaneously satisfying and heartbreaking. This was the woman who had systematically destroyed my life, who had turned my own grandchildren against me, who had left me homeless and nearly dead. Yet seeing her reduced to a sobbing, broken figure on national television brought me no joy. It simply confirmed what I had always known, that cruelty ultimately destroys the person who practices it as much as their victims. Michael's testimony was even more devastating to watch. When confronted with footage of himself discussing strategies to neutralize my influence, he seemed to see himself clearly for the first time in years. The man who had defended his wife's actions who had called me mentally unstable, who had allowed his children to be coached to reject me, finally understood the magnitude of what he had done. "Oh God," he whispered as he watched himself on screen, discussing ways to speed up my financial ruin. "Oh God, what have I done? What have we done to her?" His breakdown was complete and devastating. The composed financial professional who had given interviews about protecting his family from a dangerous grandmother was gone, replaced by a man who could finally see the cruelty he had enabled and participated in. "She sacrificed everything for me," he sobbed, his voice barely audible. "She gave me life twice over, and I tried to destroy her. I helped them destroy her. How could I have been so blind? How could I have been so cruel?" The courtroom was absolutely silent, except for Michael's weeping. Even the reporters had stopped taking notes, transfixed by the sight of a man confronting the true magnitude of his betrayal of the person who loved him most. Judge Chen called for a recess, but the damage was done. The truth had been revealed in the most public way possible, broadcast to the nation that had watched my destruction and now witnessed the exposure of those responsible. As I sat in that courtroom watching the people who had destroyed my life face the consequences of their actions, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete vindication. Not satisfaction, not revenge, but simply the profound relief of having the truth finally acknowledged. The nightmare was ending, and justice at long last was being served. The court's verdict was swift and uncompromising. Judge Chen delivered the ruling with the kind of moral authority that comes from decades of witnessing human cruelty and having the power to address it definitively. The systematic abuse documented in this case, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the packed courtroom, represents one of the most calculated and devastating examples of elder abuse and parental alienation I have encountered in my career. The defendants not only destroyed the plaintiff's family relationships and financial security, but they manipulated innocent children into becoming instruments of psychological torture against their own grandmother. Sarah was sentenced to 7 to 12 years in federal prison for elder abuse, financial fraud, and conspiracy. The charges included not just what she had done to me, but her systematic manipulation of the children, which qualified as a form of child abuse under federal law. Michael received 5 to 10 years, his sentence somewhat reduced because of his obvious remorse and his willingness to cooperate fully with the investigation. Mr. Davies, their lawyer, faced disbarment and criminal charges for his role in filing fraudulent legal documents and helping to orchestrate the campaign against me. Brenda was charged as an accessory to fraud for her role in the financial schemes and her public participation in destroying my reputation. But beyond the criminal penalties, the court ordered massive financial restitution. I was awarded damages that not only compensated me for my financial losses, but acknowledged the profound emotional trauma I had endured. The money would restore my security, but more importantly, the court's recognition of my suffering validated everything I had experienced. Judge Chen's statement about my character was perhaps the most meaningful part of the verdict. Mrs. Dorothy Johnson, she said, has been vindicated not just legally but morally. Her lifetime of service as a pediatric nurse practitioner, her dedication to her family, and her unwavering integrity have been maliciously attacked by people who exploited her love for their own gain. This court finds that she is not only innocent of the accusations made against her, but that she represents the highest ideals of professional caregiving and family devotion. Dorsey, the judge went on to denounce the abuse of elderly people by family members, calling it a betrayal that strikes at the heart of everything we value about family bonds and respect for our elders. She ordered that the case be used as a precedent for future elder abuse prosecutions, and that my story be included in training materials for legal professionals. Watching Sarah led away in handcuffs was surreal. This woman who had controlled every aspect of my destruction for so long was now powerless, facing years of imprisonment for her crimes. She looked smaller, somehow diminished by the exposure of her true nature. As they led her past my table, she stopped and tried to speak to me. "Dorothy, I'm sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I never meant for it to go this far. I was just scared of losing control. Please, can you forgive me?" I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had systematically destroyed my life and manipulated my grandchildren into rejecting me. What I felt wasn't anger anymore. It was something closer to pity. "Sarah," I said quietly, "I forgive you, but forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. You need to face what you've done and find a way to make peace with it." Michael's sentencing was harder to watch. This was my son, the baby I had raised alone, the young man I had saved from his gambling debts, the father I had helped create through my sacrifice and deception about Lily's conception. Seeing him led away to prison felt like watching my own failure as a mother. But before he was taken away, he was allowed to speak to me. Unlike Sarah's desperate plea for forgiveness, Michael's words came from a place of genuine understanding and remorse. "Mom," he said, his voice broken with grief, "I know I can't undo what I've done. I know I can't give you back the years we lost or take away the pain we caused you. But I want you to know that I finally understand what Sarah did to all of us. She didn't just manipulate you. She manipulated me too, turned me against my own mother, made me participate in destroying the person who loved me most." He paused, struggling to find words for the magnitude of his regret. "I'm going to use my time in prison to get help, to understand how I became someone who could treat you that way. And if you'll let me, when I get out, I want to spend the rest of my life making it up to you and the kids." I reached out and took his hand, this man who was still my little boy despite everything. "Michael, I love you. I always have and I always will. What happened doesn't change that. Use this time to heal, to become the father Ethan and Chloe need you to be." The children's reaction to their parents' imprisonment was heartbreaking to witness. Ethan and Chloe, now 10 and 12, were old enough to understand that their parents had done something terrible, but young enough to be completely bewildered by the collapse of their world. Initially, they were placed with Brenda, but her arrest for fraud meant they needed alternative care. Dr. Hendricks, who had become involved in the case as a witness, helped arrange for them to stay with a family friend while they received intensive therapy to help them process the trauma they had experienced. But what gave me the most hope was their gradual reach toward me. It started with a letter from Chloe, written in her careful 12-year-old handwriting. "Dear Grandma Dorothy, I'm sorry I said mean things about you. I didn't understand what was happening. The therapist says Mommy was sick and made us say things that weren't true. I remember now that you were always nice to me. Can I see you sometime?" Ethan's approach was more hesitant, but equally heartbreaking. He sent me a picture of our family that included me for the first time in years. At the bottom, he had written, "I'm sorry I forgot you were my grandma. I want to remember the good times again." Our first meeting after the trial was carefully supervised by their therapist, a wise woman who specialized in helping children recover from parental alienation. The children were nervous, confused, carrying the weight of years of programmed rejection that they were just beginning to understand. "I don't know how to be with you anymore," Chloe admitted tearfully. I used to love you so much, and then I learned to hate you, and now I don't know what's real. What's real, I told her, is that I love you, and that love never changed, even when you couldn't feel it. We're going to take this slowly, and we're going to help you remember who you really are, not who you were told to be. The healing process was gradual and sometimes difficult. The children had to confront the reality that their parents had lied to them, manipulated them, and used them as weapons against someone who loved them. They had to rediscover their own authentic feelings and memories, separating what was real from what had been programmed into them. But children are remarkably resilient, and with good therapy and patient love, they began to remember who I really was to them. They recalled the birthday parties I had organized, the bedtime stories I had told, the gentle care I had provided when they were sick or scared. Slowly, carefully, we began to rebuild the bonds that Sarah's manipulation had severed. Sarah's letters from prison became increasingly desperate as the months passed. She wrote about the horror of incarceration, about her regret for her actions, about her desperate desire to see her children. But there was also a continued failure to take full responsibility, a tendency to blame circumstances or claim that she had been misunderstood. I know you probably hate me, she wrote in one letter, but I'm still the children's mother. I never meant to hurt them. I thought I was protecting them from interference. Can you help me get visitation rights? Can you tell them I love them? I read her letters with a mixture of sadness and recognition. Sarah was still trying to manipulate, still trying to position herself as a victim of circumstances rather than the architect of her own destruction. The children's therapist advised against allowing any contact until Sarah demonstrated genuine understanding of her actions and their impact. Michael's letters were different. His were filled with genuine remorse and a growing understanding of what he had done. He was receiving therapy in prison and working with counselors who specialized in family reconciliation. His letters showed real growth, real accountability, and a genuine desire to make amends. I'm learning about something called trauma bonding, he wrote in one letter. How Sarah used my childhood wounds and my fears about being a good father to manipulate me into hurting you. It doesn't excuse what I did, but it helps me understand how I became someone I never thought I could be. As the months passed, I began to see the possibility of real reconciliation with Michael, though it would take years of work and proof of genuine change. With Sarah, I held little hope for meaningful relationship restoration, but I prayed for her healing nonetheless. The children continued to thrive in therapy and in their growing relationship with me. They were learning to trust their own memories and feelings again, to distinguish between authentic emotions and programmed responses. Most importantly, they were learning that love doesn't seek to control or manipulate, but simply to cherish and support. Grandma, Ethan said to me one day as we worked in my garden together, I remember now why I used to love coming to your house. You never made me feel like I had to be perfect. You just let me be myself. That simple statement felt like the greatest victory of all. My grandchildren were rediscovering not just their love for me, but their own authentic selves, free from the manipulation and control that had defined their early years. 3 years have passed since the trial that changed everything, and my life has become something I could never have imagined during those dark months of homelessness and despair. I am not just surviving, I am thriving in ways that surprise me every day. My house, the one I was forced to auction off during my financial ruin, was included in the court's restitution order. The current owners, a young family who had purchased it in good faith, were compensated by the court, and I was able to return to the home where I had raised Michael, where I had dreamed of watching my grandchildren grow up. But this house is different now. It's no longer a museum of past sorrows, but a living sanctuary filled with authentic joy. Ethan and Chloe visit every weekend, and their laughter fills rooms that were once silent with grief. We cook together in the kitchen, where I used to prepare meals for Michael, but now the memories we're making are uncomplicated by manipulation or hidden agendas. The children have flourished in their therapy and in our rebuilding relationship. Ethan, now 13, has discovered a love of gardening, and we spend hours together in the backyard planting vegetables and flowers. He tells me about school, about his friends, about his dreams for the future, conversations that feel precious, precisely because I know how close I came to losing them forever. "Grandma," he said to me recently as we planted tomatoes, "I'm sorry I was so mean to you before. I didn't understand that Mommy was making me say those things. I remember now how much I loved coming here." Chloe, now 15, has inherited my love of reading and my interest in healthcare. She talks about becoming a nurse like I was, and I share stories about my career, about the joy of helping families during difficult times. She listens with the kind of genuine interest that reminds me why I loved my profession so much. "I want to help people like you did," she told me, "but I also want to help families that are fighting to stop them from hurting each other like we did." Their insight and resilience amaze me. These children, who were systematically programmed to reject me, have not only forgiven the manipulation they endured, but have learned from it. They are becoming adults with a deep understanding of the importance of authentic relationships and the dangers of allowing others to control their emotions and choices. Michael continues his journey of redemption from prison, though his path is much longer and more uncertain. His letters have evolved from desperate apologies to thoughtful reflections on the kind of man and father he wants to become. He has completed multiple therapy programs and is working toward a degree in social work, hoping to dedicate his life to helping other families avoid the destructive patterns he allowed to take root in his own. "I'll never forgive myself for what I did to you," he wrote in his most recent letter, "but I'm learning to channel that regret into something constructive. I want to spend the rest of my life making sure other families don't suffer the way ours did." The children write to him regularly, their letters carefully considered and emotionally honest. They love him, but hold him accountable for his choices. Their therapist has helped them understand that love and accountability aren't mutually exclusive, that healthy relationships require both compassion and clear boundaries. Sarah's path has been much more difficult. She has struggled to accept full responsibility for her actions, continuing to minimize her role and blame external circumstances. The children have chosen not to maintain contact with her, a decision their therapist supports as necessary for their continued healing. "Maybe someday," Chloe said recently, "when I'm older and stronger, I'll be able to have a relationship with Mommy again. But right now, I need to focus on becoming healthy myself." Brenda remains isolated and bitter, her reputation in ruins, her relationship with her grandchildren permanently severed. Her choices led to complete ostracism from the community she had once been part of, a stark reminder of how cruelty ultimately destroys the person who practices it. But my transformation goes far beyond the restoration of family relationships. The experience of systematic abuse and ultimate vindication has given me a sense of purpose I never had before. I have become a national advocate for elder abuse prevention and family reconciliation, speaking at conferences and working with legal professionals to improve protections for vulnerable older adults. My memoir, The Grandmother They Tried to Erase, became a bestseller, and has helped countless families recognize and address patterns of manipulation and alienation. The royalties have allowed me to establish a foundation that provides legal assistance to elderly people facing family abuse, ensuring that others have the resources I was lucky enough to eventually access. I work closely with Dr. Martinez and Dr. Hendricks in developing training programs for healthcare professionals, legal workers, and social service providers. We teach them to recognize the signs of systematic family manipulation and to understand how sophisticated abusers can manipulate systems designed to protect vulnerable people. What happened to you, Dr. Martinez often tells audiences, could happen to anyone. Dorothy's story reminds us that abuse doesn't always look like what we expect. Sometimes it comes wrapped in the language of concern and protection. My days are full of meaningful work, loving relationships, and the kind of peace that comes from surviving the worst possible betrayal and finding your way back to joy. I volunteer at the Children's Hospital where I once worked, sharing my experience with new parents and providing support during difficult times. The young nurses I mentor often ask me how I survived such a devastating experience, how I found the strength to fight for truth when everything seemed hopeless. The truth has its own power, I tell them. It may be buried, twisted, or ignored for a while, but it doesn't disappear. And real love, is stronger than any lie. It just takes courage to distinguish real love from manipulation and patience to wait for justice. My relationship with Lily, now 4 years old, has blossomed in ways that feel miraculous. She knows me as Grandma Dorothy, the woman who makes pancakes in funny shapes and reads stories with different voices for each character. She doesn't know about the complicated circumstances of her conception or the legal battles that surrounded her early years. She simply knows that she is loved completely and unconditionally. Recently, as I was tucking her in during one of her weekend visits, she looked up at me with those serious brown eyes that remind me so much of Michael at that age. "Grandma Dorothy," she said, "I love you more than all the stars." "I love you more than all the stars too, sweetheart." I replied, my heart full of gratitude for this second chance at grandmother love. "Will you always be my grandma?" She asked the question that might have broken my heart 3 years ago now, filling me with confidence. "Always," I told her. "No matter what happens, no matter how big you get, no matter where life takes you, I will always be your Grandma Dorothy, who loves you more than all the stars." As I turned off her light and closed her door, I realized that this moment, this simple exchange of love between a grandmother and grandchild, represented everything I had fought for. Not revenge, not even justice, but simply the right to love and be loved in return. My life now is not just restored, it is transformed. I am no longer just surviving the aftermath of betrayal. I am thriving in a life built on truth, surrounded by relationships based on authentic love rather than manipulation or obligation. The pain of what I endured has become the foundation for a deeper understanding of human resilience and the power of truth to ultimately prevail. Today, as I sit in my garden, watching Ethan and Chloe play with Lily, I am filled with a peace I never thought possible during those dark months when I lived in a shelter and wondered if I would die alone and forgotten. The roses I planted last spring are blooming magnificently, their vibrant colors a testament to the beauty that can emerge from careful tending and patient love. My home is exactly what I always dreamed it would be, filled with the sounds of children's laughter, the warmth of authentic relationships, and the quiet satisfaction of a life lived with purpose and integrity. Ethan is teaching Lily to throw a baseball, his patience with his little sister, reflecting the gentle strength he has developed through his own healing journey. Chloe is curled up in the porch swing, reading a nursing textbook she borrowed from my collection, her dreams of helping others taking concrete shape. These children, who were once programmed to reject and fear me, now seek me out for guidance, comfort, and simply the joy of being together. They have learned to distinguish between authentic love and manipulation, between healthy boundaries and controlling behavior. Most importantly, they have learned that their own thoughts and feelings are valid, that they don't need to perform for approval or modify their emotions to please others. The legal vindication was important, but this daily evidence of restored relationships is the real victory. Every spontaneous hug from Lily, every thoughtful question from Ethan, every shared confidence from Chloe represents a triumph over the systematic cruelty that nearly destroyed our family bonds. My work as an advocate continues to bring meaning to my days. Last month, I testified before Congress about the need for stronger elder abuse protections, sharing my story with lawmakers who have the power to prevent others from enduring what I experienced. The foundation I established has already helped dozens of families navigate similar crises, providing them with the legal and emotional support I was fortunate enough to eventually receive. Through all of this, I have learned that my greatest strength was never my professional knowledge, or my financial resources, or even my capacity for love. My greatest strength was my unwillingness to accept lies as truth, my refusal to let others define my reality, and my determination to fight for authentic relationships, even when doing so seemed impossible. The lesson I carry forward, and the one I hope others will learn from my story, is that truth has its own power. It may be buried, distorted, or suppressed for a time, but it cannot be permanently destroyed. The courage to seek truth, to document it, to fight for it even when you are alone and powerless, that courage can ultimately overcome even the most sophisticated manipulation. Family relationships built on authentic love and mutual respect are worth fighting for, but they cannot be forced or manufactured through guilt, obligation, or control. Real love seeks the other person's genuine happiness and growth, not compliance or dependency. It creates space for honest communication, acknowledges mistakes, and grows stronger through addressing conflicts rather than avoiding them. Most importantly, I have learned that dignity and self-worth are not gifts that others can give or take away. They are inherent qualities that can be obscured by abuse, but never truly destroyed. No matter how completely others may try to erase you, your essence remains. Your truth remains. Your capacity for love and growth remains. As the sun sets over my garden and my grandchildren gather their things to head home, I feel grateful not just for this beautiful life I have reclaimed, but for the journey that brought me here. The pain was real, the betrayal was devastating, and the fight for justice was exhausting. But it led me to this moment of authentic peace, surrounded by relationships built on truth and sustained by genuine love. I am Dorothy, and I am 65 years old. I am a grandmother, a retired nurse, a survivor of systematic abuse, and an advocate for others who face similar struggles. I am living proof that truth can prevail, that justice is possible, and that authentic happiness can emerge from even the deepest pain. My legacy is no longer one of professional achievements or financial sacrifices, but of courage, resilience, and the transformative power of refusing to let others define your worth. This is my story, and it ends not with bitterness or regret, but with profound gratitude for a life reclaimed and relationships restored. It ends with hope for others who may be fighting similar battles, and with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing that love, real love, is always stronger than lies.